Rock and roll. Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. Welcome to Coast EVs, your fortnightly for this week fast charge on electric vehicles and infrastructure. We are at the start of our summer break here, so this will be the final episode for about a month and a bit. But we're going to end on we'd hoped it would be a high, but it's a bit of a bum note in some ways with some of the bill news that has gone through on the weekend, but we'll still look at infrastructure, summer EV travel, and all the road trips that we've got in store to brighten things up. And if you're hitting the road, you can use our next day audio on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Airtel to soundtrack a little bit of your trip between all the songs and playlists and audiobooks that you've got queued up. So hopefully we'll have something for everyone on today. And a quick reminder, this will continue through the summer. If you're wanting your EV infrastructure news every week, we'll still be getting out via evi.plugandplayev.com, the weekly digest, the weekly one-to-one, which is kind of a companion piece to some of Walter's excellent reporting every week on the Network Architect channel of the latest stations, the entries into the AFDC. That just gives you a little bit of an email breakdown of similar things, plus EVI news for the week. So without further ado, let's move into saying hello to Walter of the Network Architect channel and Eric of the News Cooling channel, who's been playing with off-grid solar, charging his Bolt EV, and dealing with the California cat ranch. How's life, chaps?
Meow.
Yeah, indeed. I was just thinking I should have got my cat on for this one, then I realized that was the whole point of my trip, was to get the pets to Ohio. So we don't have a cat at the moment. But next time when we return for the fall season, or whatever we're calling it, we'll have more cats on the show for sure. And Walter, how are things in your neck of the woods?
We just got rain for the first time in over, I think it was about 2 weeks. I was really excited to see it.
Awesome. Well, that's not something I'm desperate for. We had rain all through the spring, but we are getting some sun and nice temperatures, so that's positive. Everybody let us know what you're up to, where you are. Maybe some people are in different locations than usual because we're traveling for summer or on the road. So let us know if that's the case, where you are, what you're driving, and the next plan for your summer trips. So we have to kind of hit the elephant in the room. I think there's a lot of news that we'll hit through this show, but essentially we're talking about, before we head off, the big beautiful bill, big billionaires bill, billionaires benefit, all the B's, lots of different B's in the bill, but EV is the piece that we're focused on for the most part, with energy adjacent policies as well. Essentially, everyone probably has heard this by this point. The federal tax credit for new EVs, $7,500, ending on the September the 30th of this year, a little bit earlier than I think even we would have expected, looking towards more the end of the year. Also, possibly you could say a little bit later, because it didn't get caught up in that flurry of activity at the start of the year when there were a lot of executive orders flying around to try and quash everything. So depends how you see it. We're certainly in for a flurry of activity here with electric vehicle sales in the next few months. Same goes for the used EV tax credit at $4,000. That will be nixed from the same date. And then a bunch of kind of surrounding solar, wind, clean energy projects generally on the chopping block in various degrees from this bill. So I think we're all of a mind that it's not good news, of course, but Eric, what's your first kind of hit as you digest the news from the weekend?
Well, I've heard that bill referred to as the buckle up bees bill. So it's kind of an interesting thing with the EV tax credit, and I've been meaning to comment on this on my own channel, but it's sort of ironic that those get the nix, because it is I think fundamentally libertarian, right? If you talk to libertarians, they say, well, I know better what goes with my tax dollars than the government does, so you should just give it back to me and let me do what I want to do with it, which is exactly what the EV tax credit is. So From a political standpoint, it doesn't make sense, given who passed it and who voted for it. But there is a question about how that's going to affect prices, because there's a school of thought that automakers are baking in additional revenue margins to account for that tax credit, right? So they know that they can make an extra 5 or 10% margin because there's this free tax credit floating around, and if you take that tax credit away, then they're going to have to reduce their prices and their margins and in order to compete a little bit more effectively. So there's that school of thought. I don't know how much I agree with that completely. I think we're already naturally going to see EV prices dropping anyway. And quite honestly, they just might be too late, because this is clearly antagonistic towards the EV market. But that ship might have already passed, right? We're already seeing EVs getting closer and closer to price parity. I think I saw somewhere that grid tie battery prices in China have now dropped to the $50 per kilowatt hour mark, which is like a major milestone in terms of just the cost for energy. And then batteries being the most expensive component of EVs means that's the area where we can make up the most in terms of price and cost. So I think maybe the big tragedy in this is the Chevy Bolt EV isn't going to be released in time. It sounds like for buyers who are probably the most price sensitive, to be able to enjoy an additional discount based on that credit. So I don't know. I have mixed feelings about that credit anyway. The first time I actually was able to, buy a vehicle that qualified for it and get that tax credit, I didn't actually make enough money at that point in time to qualify for the full tax credit. So even then, it's $7,500 on paper, but it really is. I don't know if you call it necessarily a regressive tax credit, but it definitely serves less of a benefit for lower income buyers than it does for higher income buyers. The after you make that threshold amount to qualify for the full tax credit, then it finally starts making sense. So there were already some issues with it. It was already somewhat problematic, but yeah, I think just at this point in time, they're too late. They're too late for this to have an impact on EV adoption, or the people who can afford EVs buying EVs.
I think the the biggest piece is probably the leasing side of things, right? Where you could, it was really confusing for a long time for outright purchases, because they had all the different levels of whether it was an SUV or whether it was something else, what qualified for $80,000 cutoff, what qualified for $55,000. Then, it made it very simple for people, especially as EVs are kind of conducive to leasing in the first place with technology changing so quickly. But I think what gets forgotten in that is that a leased EV becomes a cheaper, certainly a heavily depreciated used EV in 2 or 3 years' time, right? So all of these things that have sold in 24, 23, not so much the year before, but there's a couple of years worth of pent-up inventory here of very nice, very capable electric vehicles. A lot of, the EGMP models are going to be leased by the sound of it. From what I'm hearing, it's like 50+% of the Ioniq 5 sales were leased. So, those are going to be coming back on the market just as the tax credit kind of goes away and, doesn't factor in anymore. And obviously you won't have the used credit to factor in either. But at the same time, those are some very capable EVs that are going to be hitting the market, towards the middle of next year. So I think the supply will still be there. Plus, you have, as you mentioned, the Bolt EV coming back, the Nissan Leaf, although we did hear that's going to be a little bit less aggressive on production targets, as a result of this kind of environment we've got. So I do think there will be increased headwinds, but there's the affordability aspect is going to be crucial, right? We've already seen, for example, Hyundai, Kia, when they didn't have the credit, when they didn't qualify for new purchases, because the batteries or the vehicles weren't being assembled in the US yet. This was all pre-Meta plant. They passed it on. They just figured out a way to fudge the pricing a little bit so that you could still get that, and the discounts from the manufacturer side or the dealership side were in line with that $7,500 credit until they got up to a place where they could offer it, through the federal side. So I think there's probably some fungibility in those numbers, and you'll see a period of adjustment, obviously where we're going to go very high sales here all the way up to the deadline of September 30th. Then it starts to crash. Obviously, Q4 is going to be a bit of a nightmare in terms of analyzing those sales, but you'll be able to point to Q3 as pretty high, and then it's just blank slate. What are you going to do for manufacturers to set the pricing in 2026? Walter, I want to get your take as well. I linked a video that you did for Out of Spec Bits. Thank you for passing that. Kind of comparing some of the European subsidy removals and then bounce backs, and same with Canada. They had some of the subsidies provincially removed earlier this year and are coming back. So maybe you've seen more of this on a other market level, but I'm definitely interested in your take on what this means, immediate term, but obviously longer term for EV adoption in the US.
Yeah, Canada was actually a federal $5,000 deduction that got yanked, and there was an immediate downturn in EV sales, some as high as a 10% dip in, where was it? British Columbia dipped 10%. They went from 25% down to 15%, as I understood from reading the articles. So for sure there will be, but my personal opinion is the biggest effect is the bully pulpit effect that is occurring from the White House entering into the discourse of the population really having the most of it. Because $7,500 tax credit, as you say, Steve, you yourself purchased a vehicle without the $7,500 tax credit. I shouldn't say I purchased. Me and my wife walked in to get the Cadillac Lyriq. The $7,500 tax credit really wasn't in our thinking. I mean, we're looking at the price of the car was good, and then we might get a tax credit at some point in the future. Okay, cool. And then it turned out we did, and we got some money back on taxes. But it wasn't like a driving factor. And I think most people, when they come down to it, that's going to be the case. And as John McElroy says, every car that's made is sold. So really, it's a question of how many of these puppies roll off the assembly line, and that's how many are going to be sold. At what price is yet to be determined. Those are determined by market forces, and eat into profits. And we know that Ford is celebrating the fact that their battery plant is not going to have the federal. I don't think there's subsidies. I forgot what the Ford battery plant was getting from the Inflation Reduction Act that stayed intact through the big beautiful bill, but they're celebrating the fact that they're going to be able to build that battery factory and make more EVs. And so if EVs are being made, they're going to be sold, and the only question is who's going to buy them and at what price. So I really think it's mostly a nothing burger as far as the loss of the 75, because the big beautiful bill, there was some scary things being discussed with the punitive tax credit and a few other things, and those didn't make it through into the final version. And NEVI somehow survived, I think. I was really thinking they were going to de-law the NEVI clause or whatever, but it seems to like NEVI's still in place. But there's additional complexities associating with this big beautiful bill passing, namely Elon Musk now forming a new political party. And so it's sad to say that he was hired to go in and clean up the federal government in the Doge effort, and he fired a bunch of people. I mean, a lot of people that I had a affinity for with the joint office, and they basically all are empty seats now with people with their resumes out there doing consulting. And he's not even a part of the Republican Party anymore, as far as I know. He's soon to form a new party, third party. At least that's the story that we're hearing right now. So that's a real sad subtext to the passing of the big beautiful bill, is the fact that Elon Musk, who was there in order to help clean up the government in what could be considered a noble approach, and it might be his tactics were flawed, but at least it was a try to help minimize the size of the federal government and wasteful spending, things like that. But now all that is just kind of nullified because he's not even a part of Doge anymore, and the whole Doge effort might still be going on, but he can't affiliate himself with it anymore because he's now forming a new political party as a result of the passing of the big beautiful bill. And so all kinds of nastiness is happening here, and it's just kind of deteriorating into a shouting fest. But the actual passing of the big beautiful bill, as far as it relates to EV adoption, in my personal opinion, is more or less a nothing burger, because what we're talking about is the loss of the $7,500 tax credit. And if we roll the clock back to Trump v1, there was no $7,500 tax credit, and EV adoption was doing just fine. In fact, from what I understand, it was one of the highest upticks of EV adoption in the entire history of EVs during Trump v1. The difference being was that in Trump v1, EVs were not the same threat, the material threat, the existential threat that they are now. And I've heard it phrased that now we're in what's known as the white hot phase of transition, where there needs to be backlash because it's a legitimate threat. And so that's where this bluster is coming from. But again, the loss of the $7,500, I don't know what else is in there that anyone can call out to be EV negative. But if all we're talking about the loss of $7,500 federal tax credit, what we can expect, in my opinion, is something similar to Germany and Canada, which is a temporary blip followed by a snapback. And really, it's the automakers themselves who are going to determine how many EVs they make. And then it's all driven by market forces, how many of those get sold and at what price.
It's an interesting callback to the previous phases, because we did have an entire Trump administration before this, when EVs were kind of that first phase of Eric and I owning Bolts, and Eric's still in the Bolt phase, of course, but the important part is that we went through an entire period where it just wasn't particularly on the radar. I think I remember campaigns from Plug in America and some of the usual advocacy groups saying, we need to protect the tax credits, because at that point it was the Obama era kind of credit that was just a up to 200,000 vehicles sold cap, and I think Tesla ran out of that at some point in 2019, and then GM hit it a little bit later on, and there weren't that many vendors kind of, or OEMs producing vehicles, and they kind of left it because it was like, well, that's no big deal, it's the other things going on at the time. And I think it's kind of interesting. I don't know how far we're going to get down the politicization of EVs, but if you think back to it, it's really the Biden administration that kind of politicized EVs, because that was run on a campaign of, everyone remembers 500,000 chargers kind of promises, and, clean energy, and all of the stuff that actually did eventually come to be in IRA and some of the bipartisan infrastructure law bills. But that was really the start of politicizing EVs. And I think, Walter, you've made the point in some of your videos that this is very revenge focused, right? This is this administration wanting to rip up and tear up a lot of the things that went in the previous
they don't want to win for Biden, basically an Obamacare version 2. They don't want NEVI stations with Biden's name as the subtext of them.
Yeah, so as much as it is, this station behind me right here is a NEVI station, just as a kind of aside. This is the Brookville, Pennsylvania station. There's a lot of interesting stuff, kind of side stories to NEVI, that this is actually very close to a Pilot Flying J location as well, which I guess could have received NEVI funding but did not. This was the one that got it. The other one is an exit down, so they still have even redundancy here at a location that was very, very, it's rural. It's the Pennsylvania wilds. It's not really near to any of the big cities in PA, but it's a super useful location, and it's been built, with all the kind of conditions and the elements in mind, that typical kind of Love's build with the Omniport, the canopy. So they've not spared any expense there, but Pilot Flying J wasn't put off putting in their station either, just down the road. So you still have that kind of influence rolling in. As you said, NEVI isn't dead by any stretch. We're going to pass 100 stations here pretty soon. It looks like we'll be getting about at least half the country kind of pushing on to build out their plans. So, that stuff remains. I'm trying to kind of, reconcile like where the medium term is, because I think we know that there's going to be a surge in EV sales here. And I want to come to people's comments in a sec here, because I've got to catch up to see what everybody else is saying. But, then we're obviously going to get a crash. Q4 is going to be difficult. What are we thinking in terms of, what are going to be the crucial things that manufacturers need to focus on? Especially, Eric, I want to go to you, because the Bolt is going to be a key piece in this, I think. But, what does it mean for affordability in the next year or so of EV sales after this sunsets?
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think one thing before I dive into that is you brought up a very good point of, I think what we're going to see is an artificial spike. And this was one of the impacts of that EV tax credit to begin with, is if you looked at the sales chart over the course of the year, it upticked from Q1 to Q2 to Q3 to Q4, and it was always that upward trend. And it was more than just the increase in sales, like natural increase in sales over time. What it was is, the closer you got to the end of the credit year cycle and the closer you got to getting your tax credit rebate the next year, the more people bought their EVs, because there's a shorter time span between buying the EV and then getting your tax credit. And I think with the leases, that maybe affected it a little bit, but we still see that upward trend. With this, we're going to see a spike in Q3, and I don't know that we're going to see a drop off, but at best, I think we're going to see level, right, from Q3 to Q4. But the removal of this tax credit is very likely going to lead to a flattened sales over the course of the year. So you might see a slight uptick from Q1 to Q2 to Q3 to Q4, but we're likely going to see a much flatter annual EV sales that's going to maybe mimic internal combustion sales a lot more closely. So I think that's what we can expect. What that baseline level of sales is for a given year, I think that's anyone's guess at this point. But to segue into your question about what automakers are going to need to do, I think especially and this is specifically for the North American market, I think we've kind of established that the American consumer is really on board with about 300 miles of driving range based on the EPA standard. And so I think that's where the wiggle room comes in, is once you can hit that mark of roughly 300 miles of driving range, then it's a matter of focusing on the other, we'll call them pain points, but really they're the other key criterion for EVs, which is charging speed seems to be one that a lot of people are concerned with, but I really don't think that that's important as price. So if you can get a lower cost EV with roughly 300 miles of range with decent charging speed, and then the features and functionality that you would expect in even a sub-premium grade car, right, regardless of powertrain, once you get that, I think the sales they're gonna handle themselves. Once if you can get 300 miles of EV range and price parity with the equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle, you're going to end up growing those EV sales with or without a tax credit. That's my prediction. And that's why you say something like the new Bolt EV. I think the adoption of LFP cells for a lot of these automakers is going to be huge, because that's going to give them close to that 300-mile mark while reducing battery pack prices by 30 or 40% pretty easily. And then that's going to bring in that more competitive family of EV vehicles, that price competitive family of EV vehicles.
It's worth noting that batteries are a kind of through line here, and through to the positive side as well, because while wind and solar did get targeted very heavily, battery energy storage was not subject to the same kind of scrutiny, and actually came out of it fairly intact. I think because it's kind of a catch-all, right? So it doesn't matter what's generating your electricity in that sense. It's that batteries are now very cost competitive, and storage, whether it's 4-hour storage or even longer duration, is getting to be very important. Markets like Texas, are really starting to come up. I think it's close to 95% of the capacity they added in the last year was based on solar and wind, but also paired with battery energy storage. So that seems to be the kind of through line of lower battery prices, are going to help EVs, affordability, lower battery prices are going to help the energy side of things, storage, whatever is generating it is going to be key to making sure that, stuff like intermittency isn't an issue. So I think with the comparison as well with data centers, AI data centers, and the need to power those, there's a lot of kind of parallels between, the arguments that are made against EVs. For the grid side, we can't power them, the grid can't keep up, whatever. Yet somehow if you switch that to AI data centers, suddenly it's like, oh, the grid's going to be fine, we're going to find ways to do it. And it's, that there's no or very few ways that data centers are going to contribute to the solution or be part of the solution, whereas electric vehicles, if you start to get into smart load management and storage as an electric vehicle with bidirectional capability, there is a place for grid resilience with electric vehicles. So it's interesting to see somebody talk out of one side of their mouth against electric vehicles and then come to the riding rescue of data centers saying, no, we'll be fine, we'll find the power. So I think there's some good comparisons to look at with the bill and where it's kind of putting the emphasis. But moving on, let's jump into the comments here and see if there's any questions that we need to answer. We have Landon of the Arkansas E-Traveler, 200 miles west of Walter in Franklin, North Carolina. Boy, you do travel. Loving these mountains on a family trip. And there's Walter from NASCAR country, driving his wife's Lyric and living the dream until she gets back and finds out what he's been up to. So keep that car in good condition or get it detailed before she gets back. Varsky video, BMW i4 M50. Good evening from Texas. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And everybody should go check out these channels. The Arkansas E-Traveler, Varsky videos, Crazy Postman, checking in from 1404 exactly miles west of Walter. I really hope your air conditioning is fixed, or at the very least you've managed to move your stuff outside, because some of those temperatures seem to be baking.
Not fixed.
Not fixed. Still seems to have internet connection though and ability to type, so he's not passed out and dehydrated just yet. If we don't hear from you, Crazy Postman, we will check in on you at the end, I promise. Mike Mahan from Southern California, Model 3 Highland, Lexus RZ450E for now, and noticing Honda CR-V fuel cell vehicles on the road. So a very rare sight indeed. Thanks for sending that, Mike. Only available in California, I'm reliably informed. Electrified light vehicles, good evening folks. Driving a Kia EV6 GT line, 49,000 miles, coming up on 50. Very good. I would note that I am just past 90,000 miles, so I'm struggling to understand whether I should keep it below 100,000 and safe from Hyundai's clutches if they decide to start charging people for ICCUs, or if I should just go for it and chase Eric down on the mileage of his 2017 Bolt EV. We will see in future videos. Andy Getz from Fort Myers, Florida. Welcome. Ford Mustang Mach-E, sometimes the Smart 4.2, drive electric until I die, as we all will. You will pry my electric drivetrain from my cold, dead whatevers. TK Media, glad you got the video on GM charge point up, Walter. Mentioned the sites to Eric months ago. We should definitely come back to that. I think there's some interesting stuff that someone had actually asked us to cover on the GM Energy and charge point hookup and where that's going. I think some of those are in New York State from the sound of it. So let's come back to that when we hit infrastructure. We have Doug Stevenson from British Columbia, 2023 Bolt EUV. Thank you very much for joining us. BC Hydro continues to expand that network all over the province. So that's one source of happiness from north of the border. And speaking of which, Mark Berenger from Newcastle, Ontario, on the other side of the country, up in Canada, driving his 2023 Kia EV6 GT Line 2. Welcome. Thanks for joining. Yitzhak Kabinski down in South Florida, driving a 2025 Equinox EV. Plenty of folks getting into those. Definitely a popular vehicle. Also go check out, Average EV is a little bit further down here. I'll shout that out when we get to him, but he is celebrating a year of ownership in his Equinox EV as well. So good review on that. Very comprehensive. Just watched this morning. Go check that out. Dennis Lyon from Southeast Michigan, 2017 Bolt EV and a 2024 Tesla Model Y. Welcome. And speaking of whom, Average EV, Tyler from Maryland, 2024 Equinox EV. That's how he's got the year. And a 2023 Volkswagen ID4. Also some interesting commentary on his decisions to whether to stick with the ID4, looking at a Rivian R2. Interesting stuff coming up from Tyler at the Average EV. And definitely check out that year review of the Equinox EV. Let's see. We've got Vlad. Cheers, lads. Motor City, Model Y, billionaires bill indeed. Keep the faith. We do, and I don't think there'll be any problems, but definitely got to cover this stuff, good, bad, or indifferent. Dan EV Man in Southeast Michigan, 2023 INX6, 2019 Nero EV, planning more Nevi site construction review trips. Good. I hope Michigan keeps up, actually. They need some work on the Upper Peninsula, but after that lone Rivian site in Lansing, East Lansing, I don't know if I heard of any more since, so definitely interested to see what they're going to do. Anthony, over on the West Coast, Pacific Northwest, did his 500 miles trip in the Mustang Mach-E GT. Got wind of a new canopy, DCFC Travel Center in Pendleton, Oregon. That's, X-Charge GridLink. So that's interesting because Anthony is in the region of Electric Era, who do battery integrated systems, and X-Charge, I think, is battery backed. I don't know if they actually can power at the same time. I think there's some differences in the technology, but interesting to see. As we said, batteries kind of becoming this through line for infrastructure, EV adoption, energy generation and storage, all this good stuff. So batteries are not going anywhere. We have Stephen Redditch from St. Petersburg, Florida, 2025 Kia EV6 GT Line. I appreciate all you guys do. Driving up to Boston sometime soon. Drop me a line, plugandplayev@gmail.com. We'll, if I'm in the country, which might not be, we'll happy to grab coffee. Ken Robinson, San Diego, 2022 Ioniq 5 Limited, 55,000 miles. Just back from a trip to Brandon, Oregon from South Dakota, 1,000 miles. 101 down I-5 through Eric's country back. Gotcha. Hopefully there'll be some interesting new additions pretty soon. And Mercedes-Benz hypercharging in amongst them on the Starbucks locations. Dennis has, yes, that's a solid point, 3.5 million barrels of oil per day, no longer being used, hopefully growing. We're definitely, I think we did peak oil. I think we've probably, Walter, you may have done a video on peak combustion at some point, or if you haven't, that's probably in your future. But is that, that was recent, right? Depends on the state.
It was a recommendation by a viewer. I have not done it yet. Okay. And also someone was recommending if I could track the number of gas pumps getting installed throughout the United States versus the number of EV chargers, and whether or not we've started to eclipse those.
Yeah, definitely some topics worth hitting as we hit this kind of inevitable era of FUD, I think, probably coming our way pretty soon, or a resurgence of FUD, if nothing else. Brian Ribby up in Minnesota, good evening and welcome. Let's see if I've missed anybody else. Starts to get into the conversation. So yes, John Ross, another of the Canadian contingent. Thank you for joining us. Woodstock, Ontario, Toyota RAV4 assembly pad, not far from him. He's driving a 2025 Kia EV6 land all-wheel drive limited, one of the few US-built Kias. New ones will be imported from South Korea due to the tariffs. Yeah, that's another piece we haven't even begun to hit on. Let's see. And I think after this, we mostly get commentary. So let's see if I can move into some of your thoughts. Just to confirm from Mike, the $250 federal registration fee, as number 6 answered, did not make it in. Registration fee did not continue. Will they figure a way to bring it back? Seems difficult. I think one of the things is that a lot of states do already charge you a fee. Some of it is, I think Ohio is already $250 a year, maybe $200. Massachusetts does not. I don't think they will intend to, but you start to get doubling up, right? First of all, the gas tax hasn't gone up since like 1993, I think. So you're into 30 odd years of what is supposed to be contributing to roads, and it hasn't really changed because there's so much public furor whenever gas prices go up. You have EVs do need to contribute. I think that is a fair assessment, but $250 a year is the equivalent of someone who's driving like 50,000 miles, I think, for the gas tax. So the amount was punitive and not in line with what you would actually spend if you were driving a gas vehicle and filling up with gas via the gas tax contributions. So that didn't make it in, thankfully. Hopefully it does not. What else? Yeah, and just to reiterate that point, the $7,500 tax credit, that was still there in, as Eric mentioned, the first kind of phase. It's an Obama era holdover that was, you got it back based on what you earned, right? So you had to earn a certain threshold to be able to make $7,500. Otherwise, it was a, it basically wrote off your tax liability. So if you didn't owe $7,500, then you didn't get $7,500. You got whatever you owed back as that credit. And it had the limitation of 200,000 vehicles sold, which is why Tesla had, the phase out period pretty early on and a period where they didn't have it. The regeneration of that tax credit in 2022, I guess it was, that made it so that it was a point of sale credit. You could hand it over via leases. It was much more broadly available, even though there were a lot of stipulations on the models that qualified because of assembly, battery components, where the materials came from, all that kind of stuff. It was quite complicated, but essentially if you leased, you could get away with pretty much getting that credit one way or another. And the used EV tax credit is completely new, so that has definitely just come in and gone within a couple of years. Let's see. Anything else I missed here? Crazy Postman agrees with Walter. Big nothing burger. People are sad it's gone, but won't affect much. Good point from KMIK. You also lose some on the installation of home charging. I think for a lot of people, that's going to be replaceable by local utility incentives, manufacturer incentives. Ford obviously did some pretty comprehensive Ford Power Home programs, and I think they're continuing that at least through the end of this credit. GM did some stuff with Q-Merit, if I recall correctly, Eric. It was, they were going to pay for some of your installation for home charging. That was a while back. I don't know if it's still going.
Yeah, that was the Q-Merit was one of their partners. I didn't remember seeing the exact details of that deal, but
yeah. I think in general, there's a lot of support for home charging, whether it's local utilities, state level incentives.
Yeah.
I don't know, the federal credit was the biggest kind of incentive to go and install home charging, but definitely another thing that's gone by the wayside. Then Anthony points out credit was going to sunset in 7 years anyway, increasingly difficult to qualify for, if not for the lease loophole. Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of the question mark that has been around it the whole time, right? There's a subsidy is only intended to get an industry, a fledgling industry, going and to kind of move demand enough so that you can spark innovation and let the private sector take over. Whether or not it did that enough is going to be down to history to tell. If we see a significant curtailment and it does actually impact sales for a year or two, you may say, well, it wasn't quite ready. Maybe another year or so would have been helpful, but it isn't. It's ending because of more a desire to just kind of kick back against the previous administration rather than a consideration of market forces. But yes, you are correct in the sense that this was going to go away, and it's time for the industry to kind of stand on its own 2 feet, one way or another, whether it's early or too late. And yeah, let's see. I've got a lot of comments here. I'm going to crank through them. What do you guys think? Do you want to keep on this topic or move on to infrastructure and more positive news?
Well, I do have a follow-up to some of Eric's points about the low-cost cars that are coming out and the flatlining of sales. I actually don't think there will be a decrease that would be able to be noticeable as a result of the removal. I actually think the timing of the removal of the 7500 lining up with the release of the Leaf, the Bolt, and the low-cost Tesla are going to wipe away any decrease that we would see, because those cars are going to be very compelling. We already know what the Equinox is being sold for, and the Boltium, Bolt V2, whatever we're calling it, is going to be less. I mean, there's no way around it. It's going to be less. And tax credit or no, people are going to gobble that thing up. I mean, people who run fleets need to purchase vehicles, whether there's a $7,500 tax credit or not. And that Bolt is going to be very attractive for people filling fleet spaces for lower maintenance vehicles. It's just easier to maintain an electric vehicle. So those are on the horizon. And then past that, Ford has announced a next generation EV, low cost EV that is sub $30,000. We don't know the specifics about what Ford has got cooking. Apparently it's coming out of the Skunk Works, comparable to a Chinese EV. And I'll get to the Chinese EVs in just a second. But then GM also kind of leaked out that they, past the Bolt, also have a next generation low cost EV on the horizon, kind of to hit parity with the Ford low cost EV. So I think we're looking at this feeding frenzy. And number 6 mentioned in the comments about how he doesn't have confidence in General Motors doing the right thing. And I completely agree. General Motors has no concept of what the right thing is. The only thing General Motors has a concept of is earning money. That's, the American education system is seen to be one of the best in the world. And we have people coming to our country to participate in our education system. And all those economists and marketing people end up in these large companies like General Motors. And they're looking at balance sheets. They're looking at how do you earn money? And if you can earn money by selling a car that has 2/3 fewer moving parts, less complicated to assemble, throw a battery pack and some electric motors, put 4 wheels on it and a steering wheel, put it in the hands of customers, and your profit margin is higher, they're interested. They are whether it's the right thing or not, they don't really have the concept of right and wrong. What they have the interest, their concept is black and red. Is it going to cost, are we going to lose money or are we going to gain money? If we're going to gain money, let's do this thing. And they'll pay it. They've got it figured out. And I personally think General Motors, Ford, and not so much Stellantis, I think they've kind of lost their way in the forest. And it's going to take a while to get them to come back. Are well aware that they're looking at a profitable industry, and they could play ball and make money or not. And by all intents and purposes, I see these national car companies in the process of swinging for the fence and being all in on the transition, and not because it's the right thing, but because it's a money-making opportunity, whether or not the $7,500 tax credit is there or not. But I mentioned the BYD, or I'm sorry, Chinese EVs, and there is a BYD seal, which apparently, Steve, is available in the UK.
Yes, Europe in general hasn't successfully fought off the Chinese EV sales, and it's pretty common to see a lot of brands there now with showrooms, and that's kind of a point that we didn't get onto, is like how long can the US
There's a lot of speculation on that, because should the dam burst, it is, and the zombies are inside the walls, it's a completely different conversation. But let's just stick with the BYD seal. I heard that the BYD seal is being offered in the UK for $350, or I'm sorry, 350 pounds. And excuse my US echo chamber, how much is a pound to a dollar?
It's not far off parity, unfortunately. We're not strong. I think it's about 1.2 the last time I checked.
1.2. Okay, so let's just say $400 a month, you get a BYD seal paired with an Octopus vehicle to grid charger. And as long as you agree for your battery to be used for vehicle to grid when you're not using the car, they will give you your energy for your vehicle for life for free. And so for $400, you can get a perpetual motion machine put into your garage that all you have to do is put in new windshield washer fluid and 4 tires. This is a game changer. I don't care, it's $7,500 or not. This is real technology shift, and this is boosting people's ability to buy more groceries and take their kids out to the movie theaters more. This is a major shift in quality of living. Increase in quality of living. So my personal opinion, I don't understand why the Republicans who are generally more nationalistic, push forward with domestically produced energy for private transportation more, because to me it seems like a national interest thing. But regardless, whether they're fighting for it or against it, I really don't think it's a technology that can be the adoption can be stemmed at this point. It's the horse is out of the gate, and the rest of the world sees where the story is going, and we could try to pretend like it's not happening, but it is.
So Walter, just so I heard you correctly, did you say we get a perpetual motion machine as long as it doesn't leave your garage?
No, as long as you fuel it from your garage.
Well, and I just wanted to your previous point, though, all joking aside, that when I talked about the sales numbers, though, my main point is that I think we're going to see less of a delta between Q1 and Q4 than what we saw before with the tax credit. So I'm not discounting that sales are going to continue to increase, or that these newer low cost EVs are going to completely wipe out what's going to be lost in sales from the tax credit. I'm just saying that I think moving forward, we're going to see a sort of flatter sales number year to year, rather than a up to Q4, drop down to Q1, up to Q4, drop down to Q1 that we've been seeing.
I see
ratcheting sales
because of
number.
Of capitalizing on the soon tax credit. So you hit the December, so you try to do. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So it's going to be more of a flatter.
Yes.
Over not only over quarters but also over years. It's going to be a flatter increase in the adoption curve.
Yeah, and I think that Leaf is really going to give a booster shot to Nissan, which has been suffering. And I think the Tesla low-cost cars are going to start circulating pretty soon. And I think the Bolt is going to. And then there's those next gens coming from Ford and GM. And I don't see any decrease in quantities getting ready to be geared up.
And I also don't see any decrease in gas prices, which are going to be, I think it's also going to have a huge impact in that transition to EVs.
Yeah, complicated stuff with gas prices currently. So fickle. It's so nice not to have to watch, the nickels go up and down anymore.
But the thing is, with gas prices, it doesn't seem to be part of the conversation. But they should go up, right? I mean, everything else is inflationary. Groceries don't typically go back down. I mean, they may spike and then come back down slightly, but everybody expects gas prices to go back down to $2 a gallon. And aside from the fact that you're not pricing in the negative externalities of lower air quality, especially in cities and areas where there's just huge amounts of vehicles, why are we so excited that gas prices go back down? It's, you have an option now. This is my thing with electric vehicles, that maybe in the past you could say, well, this is a quality of life issue, right? It impacts poor people or people who are on a budget much more directly because their immediate costs go up. Well, we start to have a way out of this now, because for whatever you think of electric vehicles and how they're powered, it spreads the generation. Electric vehicles don't give a monkey's where the energy comes from, how it's generated. If you're in coal country, you can power your vehicle now by coal. Hooray. If you're in a nuclear area, you can power it by that. We have natural gas mostly here, right? And then there are the best options, Anthony, over in Pacific Northwest, upstate New York, Quebec, where hydro rules, and those are dirt cheap rates. You can power your vehicle for next to nothing at home, public fast charging, whatever. So that's the energy agnostic or generation agnostic piece of the transportation electrification side, which gets really frustrating now that we're starting to focus on gas. Is burn it and gone, and it is subject, as Walter said, to these geopolitical spikes. I don't care if gas prices go up. We need them to go up, and they should go up. It's exactly what it's an indication of how volatile it is as a source of powering our transportation, and it kind of should show that electrification is the way forward, because we can find ways to settle this, whether it's taking the energy independence thing into your own hands and putting solar panels on your roof, or powering it off a Anchor Solix in your the back of your ranch. All of these things, there's ways to make that happen, and we're actively cutting off these routes, especially with the wider impacts on solar, wind, less so battery energy storage, thankfully. But these pieces are so interesting and crucial to me that it seems insane to then say, well, electric vehicles are a bad way to go when you're boosting all these other forms of energy generation, right? It's supporting domestic energy one way or another, even if you completely nix the environmental argument. What else am I missing here? We had Chase jump in from Grid Connections. Good evening. Welcome. And I think actually Chase had on Gabe Klein recently, who was one of the folks that Walter was kind of pointing out, representative of many folks who were, in part of the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation last administration, who are starting in these other roles. He's joining as an advisor to Parian, an EV data analytics firm. That was a really good interview, worth going to check out. And yeah, so there's a lot of talent floating around now, and we're kind of interesting to see where these folks set up. Chase's follow-up comment there. Yeah, we had a section on the $7,500, but Chase is there saying, not sure it's really worth the headaches for the public's views on the EV and where the industry is now. And
does anyone understand the interest for car purchase provisions out of the big beautiful bill? That something like 10% of interest gets something. It was like a very complicated. Someone said it, and I thought about what the person is. I don't understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
Is this similar to the mortgage interest deduction?
I think so. Yeah, it's a deduction for interest for car purchase to a certain extent, but your income level has to be something, and only for a certain amount of cars. That has to be domestically produced. A lot of provisions.
There was a piece that was suggesting, I think it was in the USA Today, that was suggesting this is the golden time to buy, like, because you not just have the sunsetting of the tax credits, you
got two,
but you get that Trump piece, which is offsetting some of that, claiming back the tax that you would have paid on the interest for your loan. So there's a period here where you might be able to get into a very good loan and also get the money back on the tax credit.
I'm going to revert back to my 2018 News Coulomb self and say, please consult your tax advisor or licensed tax
It's very complicated. Exactly. Yeah.
No, it's easy. The simple takeaway is go buy an EV now and then keep buying them. But that might be that we are slightly biased. I think I want to move on to infrastructure, because my entire intention with this show originally, the last one for the summer, was to kind of showcase summer travel, the amazing changes that are happening kind of every week really in front of our eyes, the journeys that I've started to take again after coming back from a kind of winter hibernation of road trips, are just incredibly different. There's so much more choice and variety, whereas previously Electrify America, and that was it pretty much, or maybe the odd dealership. The number of vendors I could potentially do. I just did another trip down to Southwest Pennsylvania, which will be using this time. I came back via Delaware, did Electric Era, Apple Green Electric, which is insane amount of stations they will have. I might be able to make this entire journey at some point in the next few months on Apple Green Electric alone. I don't think half the country is probably even aware that they exist.
And Pennsylvania too, no?
Pennsylvania's coming online. They have Alpatronic chargers on site there. This is the other weird piece of them. They're kind of in every state. They seem to use a different provider or a different hardware vendor. So they got Alpatronics in Pennsylvania. They'll be on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. A lot of the sites down there. Some of them are NEVI funded as well, so you get a whole overlap with that. You get into New Jersey. They had the whole controversy with ripping out Tesla superchargers, which weren't available to anybody anyway before, except for Teslas, so not really a loss for every other EV driver. And they do have NACS J3400 handles. At one of the service plazas I pulled into, there were two Teslas kind of surreptitiously charging on them. So they hadn't heard about the boycott and they left fairly swiftly. So I'm not sure if they thought I was filming them and using them as an example of the Tesla boycott not working, but they were definitely...
Were you?
I may have mentioned it.
I was going to ask though, Steve, like how is Apple Green's reliability?
Well, this is kind of the problem. They're fine. The app's a little bit wonky. I'm not super impressed with that. Because they're using so many vendors, I think that'll be what it comes down to. Like, if you continue going up, the further you go to either New York or Connecticut, where they are again everywhere, every service plaza really convenient. It's all good, but they're using BTC power, I think, in really older ones as well. In Connecticut, I think there's a mix of hardware. In New York at the throughways, they've got the contract now to do the Massachusetts stations. So they'll probably use Alpatronic there, I would guess, whenever those start to happen. Then there was a comment here on the pricing. Even this is varied. I mean, it is terrible. I agree. Initially, they were the first ones that I saw doing 63 cents per kilowatt hour, 64 maybe in New York. But that went down to 59 cents, which is still high, but relative to some of the other providers, it's getting there. And then you have in New Jersey, they're very conscious of the fact that there's controversy there, and it's actually only 40 cents flat fee and then 35 cents if you use the app. So it's actually incredibly cheap in New Jersey, and we'll just have to wait to see what they charge in Pennsylvania. So watch this space, I guess. I can't really judge, because it's so different across different states, but I would imagine once they get settled, all of these will start to settle on either Signet, the latest 400 kilowatt hardware, or the Alpatronics. So they offer that high power. And I think the pricing, again, it's hard to tell because it's travel plazas, right? So gas is always more expensive on the interstate. Probably will happen with EV charging as well, but there'll be a captive audience there. So we'll kind of have to wait and see. But they're there and they are ridiculously convenient. Let's see, Walter, road trips, infrastructure, things that you're kind of watching as you take these trips. And you actually went to West Virginia, right?
Yeah, oh my God. Yeah, I went to West Virginia. I couldn't believe it. It was like, it was amazing. West Virginia is the new EV capital of the United States. It is absolutely fantastic. I went and stayed at a West Virginia state lodge. So it is on a West Virginia state park property, and the lodge had a beautiful bank of 4 Blink chargers that I charged my wife's Lyric in overnight while my son and I went to go spend a night in the lodge. And the next morning we woke up and we went to a coal mine, and we saw a nice coal mine. We learned how to mine coal, and you get a ton out and you get $2. It's basically the concept of how that works. Little seams that are about 48 inches thick. And then we went to the service plaza on the toll road, and beautiful. I don't know if you've seen these things. This is ridiculous. They have like these huge, I'd say 40-foot by 20-foot video screens projecting West Virginia advertisements. And then inside is a beautiful modern convenience store with a food court and clean restrooms, and a little artistic area for people who are locals selling their wares, and then a large bank of EV chargers. This is immediately off the interstate at a service plaza, and there's not just one of them. We went to the one in Beckley, which is where the coal mine was, the service plaza there, and that thing was awesome. It had 8 stalls fed from Lincoln Electric, I think they're Electron chargers. And then we went to the next one, which is the Bluestone Service Plaza, which is basically a replica of the other one. And same thing, rinse and repeat. There was another beautiful service plaza with electric vehicle charging right there in West Virginia. And then we drove home with our minds absolutely blown. At least my mind was blown. I'm like, this is West Virginia. This is craziness. I had to rely on level 2 charging in order to get across West Virginia 18 months ago. There was not enough DC fast chargers to get across West Virginia 18 months ago. And now the state is putting in EV charging on the toll road. It was absolutely spectacular. It was really awesome. So that happened. And as far as what I'm looking for in the future is, we seem to be in a force feedback loop as far as EV charging, and the raw aggregate numbers of chargers going in the ground is increasing. One thing that happened just today, CPO Loop announced that they're now officially on the filter page for PlugShare. And so a CPO that has been quietly growing up is now one of the big boys, and they have their own filter on PlugShare. So another CPO to look out for and track, I guess. I'm not really sure what the future holds for them, but they definitely have some impressive numbers. And of course, the very large Tesla site that is running on Sunshine in California at Lost Hills did a soft opening with half the stalls open and no bathroom. So bring your own bucket to that place temporarily. And when you walk, well, I won't say it. And so that happened, but tons of things, just an amazing amount of activity going on out there in the CPO world. So plenty of good news to hear. And my personal opinion is lost a $7,500 tax credit. If that's their best shot, if that's the best shot from the petroleum controlled political establishment, it's going to fall flat. We're going to be spiking into 15% new car sales in 2026. Easy.
I didn't have time to upload this, but I also stopped at the Scranton Rechargery, which is first of all, shout out to them for just customer centric, really thinking about how they approach these renovations, because they added a canopy, but they did it. I charged there on Memorial Day weekend. So I had that, and it was perfectly good stop. Then realized the site had closed a few days later for the canopy installation. It's back up and running like a couple of days before Independence Day. So quick turnaround for the contractors. Nice work there. But for thinking about it and for emphasizing that this needs to be done between that period. Yes, it's still summer and there's still some summer travel, but really like making it happen between those really peak travel times. I'd kind of discounted it and said, it doesn't really matter. I understand they're doing something good here for EV drivers, and if it takes longer and cuts out a holiday, fine. But I was able to stop there, able to take advantage of their, lower 34 cents per kilowatt hour across the network pricing. And I just think that kind of thing really emphasizes where we are now with firms that are focused on the driver experience. They're really trying to make it so that drivers don't have a bad time, so that these things are reliable and they improve the experience at the same time. And this is it made a big difference. I was questioning how much difference a canopy would make. Really, it is now like parity with kind of like this behind me, but even more so because it's a big bright canopy station. It's branded with EVs and Iona, but it's linked to the Sheets kind of branding, same color scheme. It makes a massive difference for my kids walking across what was previously quite a dark, side lot, not out of the way, but just for there was an element of safety that you'd be thinking about. And it just rammed it home to me, like, this is coming. We're right here. I know there's stations. You've got Walter's Pilot Flying J there. You've got the Loves. They're all building these kind of canopy things, but there are companies there that are starting to make these partnerships and make the case that when someone pulls up to the gas pump, there's a just as nice EV experience across there. And we're all stopping. We're all doing 20 minutes with kids, coffee, whatever we're doing. It's the infrastructure side. If you want to look at anything in the EV world, is as bright at the moment as it's ever been from my perspective. Eric, California, land of the electric vehicle. Same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to look forward to. That Sky Charger, it looks like we're going to be getting some of our first Chempower chargers in too. So that's going to be an interesting installation for me to go check out. I'm actually going to swing by in not too long the Pilot Flying J that's going in Orland, just off the freeway. It might be full pull through parking. Don't know if that's possible, but it's at least supposed to be a canopy location, to your point, and showing my age a little bit. I mean, I can still remember when people called me crazy for saying that we needed canopies over EV charging. Why would you need that? Right? What's the benefit there? But yeah, the other one too, to your point about the sort of customer centric focus from these CPOs too is of course Mercedes-Benz. So I think we had mentioned it earlier that they're not really focusing as much on some of the highway corridors anymore, except that I-5 corridor up through California and up into Oregon and Washington is where they're going to be building some of their new chargers. So they have one going in Red Bluff that I'm going to go check out, just see if they've made any progress on that location off of I-5. So that's going to be an additional, option on that I-5 corridor. I mentioned Electric Era really being the only real viable alternative to the Tesla superchargers once you get north of Sacramento, with the Electrify America stations being very hit or miss, sometimes trailers blocking multiple stalls at the same time. And then Oh, and then the other thing too is, I don't know if I should mention it here, but there's sort of a breaking news too about Mercedes Benz high power charging network having a partnership with Federal Realty Investment Trust, which has a number of, I guess, premium retail locations throughout the country. And their initial plan now is to build charging stations at 50 of those locations. So there's supposed to be a total of 500 of their 400 kilowatt or 500 kilowatt, 400 kilowatt fast charging stalls. And the three that they named specifically right now are Camelback Colonnade in Phoenix, Arizona, Lawrence Parking Shopping Center in Broomall, Pennsylvania, and then the shops at Pembroke Gardens and Pembroke Pines, Florida. So those three they named already. And there's 20 initial sites that they're going to be building. So that should be kind of similar to their Simon property sites. So it's going to be an interesting build out for that as well. So yeah, there's a lot going on. So
yeah, once they announced Red Bluff, I had to resist the urge to stretch a piece of string 150 miles to see where the next Starbucks was and start putting pips in PlugShare. Well, they said every 150 miles.
But the funny thing is, Walter, there's a Starbucks the next exit down.
I would say just put in pip at every Starbucks, and then you'll get older people going out to check them out. You'll get the inevitable comments of "There's nothing." Raging against coming soon sites, not realizing there's a filter that you can use to turn them off. But there's that you should put them on everyone. Oh, and on my travels, speaking of people putting pips on maps, the Sturbridge, Massachusetts pilot or Flying J, whatever it is, has finally got a transformer. This took 5 seasons really.
Might actually happen then.
Yeah, my dog was looking at it wistfully the last time we went through in May, and she wasn't with me this time, but next time she'll be able to look at a transformer and hopefully a lit-up station. So,
are you sure that site wasn't in California?
We're just following your lead. We like to copy California's policies, so sitting on a site with lots of stuff that can't actually be used is probably us trying to emulate you. We do have knackered old charging stations on our service plazas, though, so that's quite similar. They don't get baked in the sun, but they definitely don't work very fast and have people moaning, so maybe we're kind of like it. Caltrans and MassDOT.
Yeah.
Peas in a pod. Yeah, and Ionic Guy, who is now a part of the Boston Massive, so we'll be very grateful for that. I think you'll be using the Reading rechargery though, Corbin. I don't think it's any huge big deal for you, but then again, he does go down to Connecticut fairly often, so it's probably useful. Let's see, what else have we got? Folks who are updating us on the infrastructure side. Average EV, Bucky's just opened on Virginia, I-81, no charging yet. Yeah, I think I've actually been there. There was a Pilot Flying J site not too far from there. When I went to Shenandoah, it wasn't active yet. It was a couple of years ago. But yeah, Bucky's there, and I think there's one going in Ohio, from what I remember.
I'd have to check for that article, but I saw something recently. I guess Bucky's is expanding pretty rapidly. I think they said maybe as many as 50 new locations. So,
yeah, we had James is my brother-in-law. He's over in Ohio, and he will possibly be using them for Tesla side. But there's only, I don't know if there's one in Ohio that has charging yet. I'd have to check. But yeah, there's a lot of sentiment after that the Bucky's experience is one of the best. Still haven't checked that out myself.
Yeah, fair warning. I saw a picture someone posted on the 4th of a Bucky's newly opened, and it was just a solid mass of people. There's it's like no room to move. It's just a solid mass of people inside there.
Yeah, I think that's the one that Tyler was pointing out. That's probably very similar.
Yeah, I heard them all saying something about this channel on YouTube talking about brisket sandwiches or something.
So good. It's like butter meat, man. It's delicious.
Yeah, we have definite sales representatives in our midst here, I think. And the jerky as well, I hear. And Crazy Postman with the comment. every time he goes to Bucky's, he expands pretty rapidly as well. So I hope that's just in the weight area, not any unfortunate ramifications later on. I don't know if I have much else to cover. I think kind of the infrastructure side was just wanting to check in on all our different pieces. The questions in the comments, if I missed any, we have Chase going to Electric Era's in-person event next week. I think that is a driver panel, if I'm not mistaken, something about kind of hearing from drivers, EV drivers, on the customer experience, what they're looking for, all that kind of stuff. Really in keeping with the brand. Seems to be definitely another one that's focused on the experience and trying to make sure that reliability and affordability are both there. So good for that. Look forward to hearing your reports. Trying to see what else. Pricing definitely seems to be a piece in the conversation here. Arkansas Traveler, it was a beautiful sight at Sheets with the canopy, unbelievably attractive. Yeah, and actually, at the time, we only stopped there for 20 minutes or so. EGMP for the win, but the locals were all around it. It was very clear that they were kind of looking at it. Some were a little bit, there were some engine revs, as you may have seen in your local areas, when there's a bit of consternation that EVs are starting to junk up their gas stations, but you could tell everyone was kind of looking at it like something's going on here. This may not be as cut and dried as we think. And part of my, I guess, the kind of, to tie it up with a neat bow, part of my feeling here is that when EVs inevitably happen, when we hit whatever the mainstream adoption kind of point is considered to be at this point, 15%, 20%, 25%, which is a point that Walter made in one of his videos. Even if it's a reduced EV outlook, 25% by 2030 is still a massive chunk of the vehicles on the road. It's going to be disparate and they'll be in different areas, but it's quite it's still massive. It's not one that OEMs can ignore. But when it happens,
can't ignore it anymore. Exactly.
Yeah. And you won't be able to make the pushback of, oh, it was all government subsidized, right? This, at the very least, this will be, well, look, they did their best to kill this. And you may say, well, it was too little, too late, but it didn't work. It happened because the technology was superior and, it was just on a roll.
Well, and one of those inflection points that I've heard referenced is there's going to be a point in time where the resale value of internal combustion engine vehicles becomes sort of untenable in terms of financing or leasing that vehicle. Because basically the understanding is once it's sold new, there won't be a market for it when it's used. So at that point in time is going to be that inflection point where people are going to stop buying internal combustion engine vehicles because this depreciation and the resale value just isn't going to be there for a vehicle that nobody is going to want to buy in 2 to 3 years used.
Yeah, I mean that's another piece coming down the road, right? It's just they're on the horizon. I don't know if even the used tax credit has sold that many. I mean, I'm sure it's brought people in, but it's hard to get cars, EVs below 25k, and now they're just going to be, I think the pricing will be a bit more spread out. They were trying to get these used EVs in under that 25k, and there's a bit of distortion on the price points with them. So I think we'll get a little more kind of spread through the market, but it's, this is coming. I think Chase made a point somewhere further up that, do we really need a tax credit when there's used EVs going to start to hit the market? And I think that's kind of one of the things that we need, is a vibrant used electric vehicle market. But again, we're kind of just preaching to the choir here. It's not like anyone is thinking that, EVs won't happen really. It's just kind of waiting to see when they do. And again, my brother-in-law's stoking the fires here with thoughts on hydrogen fuel cells, and the comment was they're not safe for work.
Well, I was going to say, if I can steal Crazy Postman's hot tag or hot take, if you will, there is still place for hydrogen fuel. I think it's just not in personal vehicles, not in like personal transportation, commercial, industrial, maybe, but not for the average car that a consumer is going to buy. Maybe not even for the average heavy-duty truck that a person is going to buy.
Walter, you probably saw some hydrogen stuff at ACT Expo. Was it?
Yeah, so it was noticeable that at ACT Expo, the hydrogen booths were basically just manned by the people who were there in order to keep the lights on. There was no one having discussions in front of the hydrogen booths, but the ChemPower booth, the Alpitronic booth, the ChargePoint booth, the Delta booth, those were hopping places. So just the centers of gravity are obviously shifted in the commercial market to full electrification. It just seems easier. I mean, you just get a grid connection, although it might take longer at certain times. Once it's in, you're fueling your vehicles and there's fewer moving parts and it's more reliable. You know, it's the duty cycle of the, apparently in drayage also is a slam dunk in order to electrify drayage operations.
I think probably the final point of the night should be, you know, we always get into infrastructure, and it's the most interesting part of you know, traveling with an EV. But you know, this charging at home, charging at work, opportunities for those people who can't necessarily charge at home. You know, I think the point here that Steph makes is, when will power companies and local governments start to address that aspect? And that kind of brings it down to, you know, the local level, right? Again, we talked about utilities a little bit. We talk about state incentives. A lot of that's going to start to play a big role again here, now that the federal kind of government has stepped out a little bit. So we don't want to be a part of this. You're going to get the locales that are interested and still wanting to push EV adoption. They're going to start really making a difference in whether people can make this work for their lifestyle. And the biggest piece that we haven't really solved yet is that destination charging for people who can't make it, you know, work, whether it's at work, at a town center, somewhere near where they live. All of this stuff is kind of going to be key. So I think we'll definitely need to watch that one, because I think that's probably the biggest piece. We talked about all the barriers to adoption, affordability, you know, nationwide charging infrastructure, but what if it's as simple as, you know, somebody down the road can't charge, right? They just can't find a place to charge, and they're just like, I don't know how I would do my daily commute. So that's the piece that is keeping them from going electric, not affordability, not going across the country.
Bigger issue in the UK, from what I understand, because street parking is far more common.
Yeah, and there's the houses are much more, you know, semi-detached kind of. There's a lot of driveways, all that stuff. So it's something that is a factor. And
yeah,
the government realizes that and is starting to move it. Yeah, so I'm going to actually have to take a look at that as I go over, see what kind of solutions they put in place. There are definitely street poles, you know, charger on lamppost, that kind of stuff. But you know, interesting. Yeah. All kinds of areas we could explore, but this is the final show of the summer, so we have to wrap it up somewhere. Thank you, everybody, for joining us across the many guests and months that we've had so far. We didn't take a hiatus last year, I don't think, but it's a good point to kind of jump off and start to plan some of the guests that we'll have when we come back. Not sure on the exact date yet, maybe late August, may wait until after Labor Day and get started again in September. But thank you very much for Walter and Eric for contributing to these every couple of weeks. I hope everybody has safe travels this summer. Let us know what your EV charging experiences are. You can always send reports to plugandplayev@gmail.com. Always interested in suggestions for topics to cover and where you've been, what you're experiencing on the road. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you on the other side. Until we join you back in not quite fall. Cheers, nerds.
Woo-hoo.